Welcome to Fall Asleep channel. Tonight, journey through how the body gently shifts from tension toward balance through breathing circulation and neural regulation, a calm narrative with interesting facts. If you enjoy peaceful stories like this, you are warmly invited to subscribe and return whenever you need to slow down. Now allow yourself to get comfortable and enjoy quiet and pleasant rest. Let's begin. Signals of activation often begin quietly within the body, a slight increase in heart rhythm, a subtle rise in breathing pace, small changes in muscle tone that prepare for movement, before awareness notices any shift. These responses originate in deep regulatory centers that scan internal and external conditions continuously, comparing incoming signals with stored patterns of safety and demand. When conditions suggest higher energy is useful, sympathetic pathways increase circulation and oxygen delivery, guiding blood toward muscles and sensory organs while slowing processes not needed for immediate action. This adjustment happens automatically and reverses just as automatically when demand fades. Chemical messengers participate in this regulation as well. Short bursts of cortisol support alertness and energy availability. Glucose release increases to fuel active tissue. Pupils widen slightly to improve visual intake. All of this remains tightly timed and proportioned under typical conditions, rising when needed, then falling back toward baseline once signals soften. The system is designed for oscillation rather than permanence. Activation followed by recovery, movement followed by settling. Recovery begins through different pathways that activate once stimulation decreases. Parasympathetic networks slow heart rhythm gradually. Breathing becomes deeper and more even. Digestive activity resumes as circulation redistributes toward internal organs. These changes do not require conscious direction. They emerge as part of built-in regulation that favors balance whenever conditions allow. The vagus nerve plays a central role in this transition, linking brainstem regulation with heart rhythm and respiratory timing, guiding coordinated shifts that unfold over minutes rather than seconds. Brain activity reflects these shifts through changes in electrical rhythm. Fast beta patterns dominate during alert focus, then gradually give way to slower alpha and theta ranges as external demand drops. This transition supports memory integration and reduced sensory filtering, allowing internal processing to take precedence over rapid reaction. Neural networks reorganize their communication patterns rather than turning off. Activity becomes distributed and synchronized instead of concentrated and narrow. Muscle tissue also participates in this cycle. Sustained contraction increases local blood flow and metabolic byproducts, while release allows circulation to clear residual chemistry, reducing stiffness and restoring baseline tone. This exchange happens continuously during posture and small movement, preventing buildup of tension when activity remains varied and moderate. Connective tissue adapts over longer spans, maintaining elasticity through slow remodeling rather than rapid change. Hormonal rhythms follow daily timing signals coordinated by internal clocks. Light exposure influences melatonin suppression and later release, guiding transitions between active and restorative phases. Serotonin systems interact with both circadian and metabolic signals, supporting stable mood regulation and sensory filtering across the day. These chemical patterns adjust gradually, aligning internal physiology with environmental cycles rather than reacting sharply to each moment. Sensory input also modulates regulation. Softer sounds, lower visual contrast, and reduced motion decrease demand on attentional networks, allowing cortical processing to shift from scanning to integration. This shift reduces overall neural load and supports slower autonomic rhythms. Yet even in quieter conditions, monitoring continues in the background. maintaining readiness without activating full response pathways. Circulation adapts smoothly through elastic vessel walls that expand and contract with each heartbeat. Baroreceptors in major arteries detect pressure changes and adjust heart output within seconds, maintaining stable flow without noticeable fluctuation. This continuous feedback prevents overcorrection and supports gentle transitions between activity levels. Blood chemistry follows similar regulation. Oxygen and carbon dioxide levels guide breathing depth automatically, keeping gas exchange within narrow, optimal ranges without conscious involvement. As these layers of regulation operate together, the body moves repeatedly between phases of readiness and recovery, not as separate states but as overlapping gradients. Activation decreases in one system while another already begins to restore baseline. This overlap prevents abrupt shifts and supports steady equilibrium. Even prolonged demand does not suspend recovery mechanisms entirely. They continue working quietly in parallel, preparing the system to return to balance when stimulation eases. And within this ongoing regulation, no single signal controls the whole process. Heart rhythm, breathing, muscle tone, hormonal release, and neural timing all contribute partial information that integrates into a unified adjustment, each component responding locally while remaining coordinated with the rest, forming a distributed system of balance that remains flexible, responsive, and capable of gradual return whenever intensity subsides and quieter conditions allow further settling to continue. From this point of coordination, regulation continues through small feedback loops that operate below conscious awareness. Sensors in blood vessels track oxygen and carbon dioxide. Receptors in muscles report tension and stretch. Digestive tissues send signals about nutrient availability. All of these inputs converge in brainstem and hypothalamic centers that adjust output without creating noticeable sensation. Changes occur as slight shifts in pacing and tone rather than as clear on and off states, allowing stability to be maintained through continuous microcorrections. Energy use gradually redistributes as demand lowers. Glucose uptake in muscles slows, liver storage increases, and fat metabolism resumes its quieter baseline role. This transition reduces circulating stress hormones while supporting long-term fuel balance. Nothing switches instantly. Instead, overlapping pathways rise and fall on slightly different timelines, creating a smooth slope rather than a sharp drop. Immune activity also follows these rhythms. Short-term activation increases surveillance during periods of higher arousal, while recovery phases favor tissue repair and cellular maintenance. Inflammatory signaling decreases as cortisol levels return toward baseline, allowing repair processes to proceed without interference. This alternating pattern protects against overreaction while maintaining readiness when needed. Temperature regulation adjusts through blood flow to the skin, widening vessels during recovery to release excess heat, narrowing them during activation to preserve core temperature. These changes occur gradually and rhythmically, supporting thermal balance while also influencing overall comfort and metabolic efficiency. Digestive function becomes more active as circulation shifts inward. Peristaltic motion resumes steady pacing, enzyme release increases, and nutrient absorption improves. This supports restoration by replenishing energy reserves and supporting cellular maintenance, again without requiring conscious control. Guided instead by autonomic timing that aligns with reduced external demand. Neural networks involved in threat detection reduce firing rates as sensory input becomes less intense. Amygdala signaling decreases, prefrontal regions regain stronger regulatory influence, and communication between hemispheres becomes more synchronized. This supports reflective processing rather than rapid scanning, promoting internal coherence across cortical regions. Memory systems also engage during these quieter phases. Hippocampal circuits integrate recent experiences into longer-term storage. Patterns replay at slower frequencies that support consolidation rather than immediate response. This internal processing does not interrupt awareness. It simply becomes more prominent as external monitoring relaxes slightly. Cardiac rhythm reflects these shifts through increased variability between beats, a sign of flexible control rather than rigid pacing. Higher variability corresponds with stronger parasympathetic influence and greater adaptability to changing conditions. This variability supports efficient circulation and oxygen delivery while conserving energy. Even posture adjusts gradually as muscle tone equalizes across opposing groups. Small stabilizing muscles release, larger support muscles redistribute load, joints settle into balanced alignment that requires less active contraction, reducing overall metabolic demand while maintaining readiness for movement if needed. Across all these systems, balance does not mean absence of activity. It means coordinated motion at lower intensity. Constant monitoring continues, yet responses remain proportional rather than amplified. This allows the organism to remain prepared without remaining in a heightened state, conserving resources while preserving responsiveness. And as regulation continues through these layered adjustments, the body maintains its capacity to shift again when conditions change, rising smoothly when stimulation returns, settling again when it fades, never fixed in one mode, always guided by distributed sensing and gradual response that sustain equilibrium through quiet continuity. Timing becomes more synchronized between breathing, heart rhythm, and neural oscillations. Slower respiratory cycles influence vagal signaling, which in turn shapes cardiac pacing and brainstem activity. This coupling supports efficient oxygen exchange while reducing overall metabolic demand, creating a rhythm that favors stability without eliminating responsiveness. Hormone clearance also contributes to this shift. Enzymes in the liver and kidneys break down circulating stress chemicals gradually, reducing their influence over minutes and hours rather than instantly. Receptor sensitivity adjusts as levels fall, further softening physiological activation without requiring new signals. This gradual tapering prevents rebound effects and supports smooth transition back toward baseline regulation. Blood flow patterns continue redistributing as vessel tone adapts. Peripheral circulation increases gently, warming skin and extremities, while central organs maintain steady supply for maintenance and repair. Capillary networks open and close in response to local needs, directing nutrients and oxygen precisely where they are required without altering overall pressure. Sensory systems reduce gains slightly during quieter phases. Auditory pathways filter repetitive background sound. Visual processing emphasizes broader patterns over fine detail, and tactile sensitivity becomes less alert to minor contact. This adjustment lowers cognitive load while preserving awareness of meaningful changes in the environment. Endocrine signaling shifts toward growth and repair processes. Anabolic hormones support protein synthesis, cellular turnover, and immune regulation. These processes occur most efficiently when sympathetic drive decreases, allowing energy to be allocated toward maintenance rather than immediate action. This internal housekeeping sustains tissue resilience over long periods. Even the microbiome participates in these rhythms. Digestive motility and nutrient availability influence microbial activity, which in turn affects production of short-chain fatty acids that support gut and neural signaling. This bidirectional exchange links digestion with mood regulation and immune balance through chemical pathways that operate quietly in the background. Circadian timing centers coordinate these layered shifts with external light cycles. Retinal input calibrates internal clocks daily, aligning hormonal release and temperature rhythms with environmental timing. This alignment improves efficiency of recovery processes and stabilizes transitions between active and quieter states across the full day. Motor planning regions in the brain reduce baseline firing during recovery phases, decreasing spontaneous muscle activation while preserving coordination circuits for rapid re-engagement if needed. This supports physical stillness without reducing readiness for movement, conserving energy while maintaining flexibility over repeated cycles. These transitions reinforce efficient regulation patterns. Neural pathways strengthen that favor proportional response and timely recovery, supporting long-term adaptability rather than persistent activation. The system becomes better at shifting states smoothly because each return to balance reinforces the same coordinated pathways. And through this continual calibration, equilibrium remains dynamic rather than static. Activity and recovery interweave rather than replace each other, allowing the body to remain prepared without remaining tense, responsive without remaining alert, steady without becoming inert. Regulation continuing quietly through layered timing and gentle feedback that sustain balance as conditions drift and return again. As these gradual shifts continue aligning internal systems, attention turns toward how awareness itself adapts when activation lowers. Cortical networks reduce rapid scanning of incoming signals and instead favor broader integration across regions. Information flows more evenly between sensory areas and associative centers, supporting internal coherence rather than focused monitoring. This redistribution of neural activity reduces overall cognitive demand while preserving the ability to respond when new input appears. Electrical rhythms across the brain become more synchronized. Slower oscillations coordinate communication between distant regions, improving efficiency of signal transfer with lower energy cost. This synchronization supports memory processing, emotional regulation, and stable perception, allowing multiple systems to operate together without competing for priority. Chemical balance within neural tissue also shifts. Neurotransmitter release patterns adjust to favor steady signaling over rapid bursts. Reuptake mechanisms clear excess molecules from synapses, restoring baseline sensitivity and preventing overstimulation. This regulation maintains clarity of signaling while supporting calm internal conditions. Spinal reflex pathways remain active even as overall muscle tone decreases, maintaining posture and balance through automatic adjustments that require minimal cortical involvement. This allows physical stability to persist without sustained effort, reducing fatigue while keeping movement available if needed. Vascular tone within the brain adapts to match metabolic demand. Blood flow increases slightly in regions involved in internal processing and maintenance, while areas associated with rapid external response receive proportionally less supply. This redistribution supports recovery functions without reducing overall oxygen availability. The endocrine system continues shifting toward long-term maintenance modes. Growth hormone release supports tissue repair. Cellular cleanup mechanisms increase activity, and antioxidant systems counter residual metabolic byproducts. These processes operate most effectively when stress-related signaling is low, allowing restoration to proceed quietly and efficiently. Even connective tissues respond to these calmer conditions. Fluid exchange within joints and fascia improves with reduced sustained contraction, enhancing nutrient delivery and waste removal, preserving elasticity and reducing microstrain accumulated during earlier activity. This slow mechanical recovery contributes to long-term mobility and comfort without noticeable sensation. Respiratory patterns stabilize into deeper, slower cycles that enhance carbon dioxide tolerance and improve oxygen delivery efficiency. This balance reduces respiratory drive and further supports vagal signaling, reinforcing the feedback loop that maintains calm physiological state across repeated cycles of activation and recovery. Regulatory pathways strengthen that favor timely downshifting once demand decreases, reinforcing the ability to settle efficiently rather than remaining elevated longer than necessary. This adaptive learning occurs through repeated exposure to normal fluctuations rather than through extraordinary events. And within this layered regulation, awareness remains present but unforced, attention broad but not diffuse, readiness intact without tension, each system contributing quietly to the same balanced field of activity that continues adjusting through countless small signals, sustaining stability through motion rather than stillness, and carrying regulation forward as conditions shift again and again in gentle continuity. With each cycle of adjustment, coordination between systems becomes more refined. Small timing differences align breathing with cardiac pacing and neural rhythms, reducing unnecessary energy use while preserving rapid response capacity. This fine-tuning emerges through repeated exposure to ordinary fluctuations rather than through rare extremes, allowing stability to develop as a natural outcome of regular daily variation. Chemical feedback loops maintain this refinement. Receptor sensitivity adapts to average hormone levels. Neurotransmitter systems recalibrate release and uptake rates, and intracellular signaling pathways adjust responsiveness to match typical demand. These microscopic changes accumulate over time, shaping how quickly activation rises and how efficiently it recedes, without altering conscious experience directly. Circulatory efficiency improves as vessel elasticity responds to consistent rhythmic flow. Smooth muscle within arterial walls adjusts tone to optimize pressure distribution, supporting steady perfusion across organs with minimal effort. This adaptability reduces strain on the heart and contributes to long-term cardiovascular resilience through gentle ongoing calibration. Sensory filtering continues adjusting based on context. Repetitive or predictable input becomes less salient, while novel changes remain detectable. This selective attention conserves cognitive resources and reduces unnecessary arousal, allowing awareness to remain open without remaining reactive. Neural pathways involved in emotional regulation strengthen connections that favor contextual evaluation over reflexive output, allowing internal states to shift in proportion to actual conditions rather than to brief fluctuations. This balanced processing supports stable mood patterns and reduces extended activation following minor challenges. Metabolic systems coordinate with hormonal timing to maintain steady energy availability. Insulin sensitivity aligns with circadian rhythms. Glycogen storage and release follow predictable cycles, and mitochondrial efficiency adjusts to habitual activity levels, ensuring that energy supply remains matched to demand without surplus activation. The immune system continues surveillance while shifting toward maintenance and repair functions. Cellular turnover proceeds steadily. Damaged components are cleared, and tissue integrity is preserved through quiet housekeeping mechanisms that operate best under low sympathetic influence. Muscle coordination adapts to minimize unnecessary co-contraction, allowing movement to remain efficient and smooth when it occurs, while rest phases permit micro-repair of fibers and connective tissue, preventing accumulation of strain over repeated use. Across these overlapping processes, regulation becomes increasingly economical, achieving the same stability with less effort and fewer chemical fluctuations. This efficiency supports endurance of balanced states without requiring constant high-level control, and through this economy of motion and signaling, the body remains capable of shifting again when conditions change, rising gently with new demand, settling again when it fades, guided by distributed sensing and proportional response that sustain equilibrium through continuous adaptation rather than fixed thresholds, carrying balance forward as an ongoing quiet process rather than a destination to be reached over longer spans. This continuous calibration supports flexibility across changing environments and internal states. Temperature shifts, light cycles, physical activity, and cognitive demand all introduce variation that the system absorbs through the same regulatory pathways, adjusting without needing separate mechanisms for each condition. Balance emerges not from resisting change, but from integrating it into existing rhythms. Internal clocks coordinate timing between organs so that energy use and repair do not compete for the same resources. Liver metabolism, immune signaling, neural plasticity, and hormonal release follow staggered schedules that reduce overlap and improve efficiency. This sequencing prevents overload and allows multiple systems to recover while others remain active, sustaining stability across the full daily cycle. Sleep-related processes begin preparation long before external cues change. Gradual shifts in temperature regulation, hormone ratios, and neural excitability create conditions that favor slower brain rhythms later on. These preparations unfold quietly while alertness is still present, showing that transitions are layered rather than abrupt. Even emotional processing follows this gradual pattern. Neurotransmitter systems adjust tone over time rather than switching states, allowing mood regulation to remain stable while still responsive to context. This continuity prevents sharp internal contrasts and supports steady perception across changing situations. Micro-movements throughout the body continue even during stillness. Small postural corrections, vascular pulsations, and respiratory shifts maintain circulation and tissue exchange, preventing stagnation and supporting constant low-level renewal. Stillness becomes active in its own subtle way, contributing to regulation rather than opposing it. Nutrient delivery and waste removal proceed continuously through lymphatic and circulatory flow, guided by pressure differences and muscular motion. This quiet transport supports cellular environments that remain stable despite ongoing metabolic activity, allowing tissues to function without accumulating byproducts that would trigger renewed activation. Brain networks responsible for future planning and memory gradually reduce dominance as sensory input softens, allowing internal narrative activity to become less pronounced and more diffuse. This shift lowers cognitive effort while maintaining awareness of surroundings, supporting calm engagement without withdrawal. Over time, repeated cycles of smooth transition reinforce patterns of proportional response. Neural circuits favor pathways that restore balance efficiently. Endocrine systems favor moderate amplitude signaling, and muscular systems favor economical recruitment. These learned efficiencies emerge from consistent regulation rather than from attempts to force calm or control activation directly. Nothing in this process requires conscious oversight. Awareness may notice some changes, but most adjustments unfold independently, driven by internal sensing and layered feedback that coordinate countless small responses into one steady outcome. And through this ongoing refinement, balance remains an active state, maintained through motion, timing, and distributed control, always adjusting, always responsive, never fixed, carrying the system forward through gentle oscillation that sustains stability while allowing continuous adaptation as each new condition arrives and fades in turn. The boundary between activation and recovery becomes less distinct, not because activity disappears, but because transitions grow smoother and less disruptive. Systems overlap in their timing so that adjustment begins before strain accumulates and recovery starts before depletion occurs. This overlap keeps internal conditions within narrow ranges that favor consistency rather than fluctuation. Neural communication remains distributed rather than centralized. No single region maintains prolonged dominance. Instead, networks alternate leadership based on context and timing. Sensory processing, memory integration, and regulatory monitoring take turns shaping overall activity without competing for control. This flexible hierarchy supports calm responsiveness across changing conditions. Chemical signaling follows similar distribution. Multiple hormones operate at low amplitude rather than a few operating at high intensity. This broad participation reduces the need for strong corrective signals and allows fine-tuning through combination rather than force. Small shifts in several systems replace large shifts in one, supporting stability through shared regulation. Cardiac and respiratory coupling continues reinforcing calm pacing. Variability remains present but organized, reflecting adaptability rather than irregularity. This organized variability improves circulation efficiency and supports oxygen delivery with minimal strain. Digestive rhythms align with reduced sympathetic tone, allowing absorption and microbial activity to proceed steadily. Nutrients enter circulation at a pace that supports maintenance rather than rapid mobilization, contributing to stable energy availability and consistent metabolic signaling. Thermoregulation remains precise through surface blood flow and subtle muscular activity, preventing excessive cooling or warming while conserving energy. This steady temperature control supports enzymatic processes and neural signaling that depend on narrow thermal ranges. Even perception of time shifts subtly as internal pacing slows. Fewer rapid sensory updates are needed, and awareness becomes less segmented into discrete moments. This continuity reduces cognitive effort while maintaining orientation and environmental monitoring. Over repeated days and weeks, these adjustments shape baseline physiology toward efficient regulation. Resting heart rhythm decreases slightly, hormonal peaks soften, and recovery processes engage more readily after periods of demand. This adaptation reflects learning at the level of tissues and circuits rather than at the level of conscious strategy. None of these changes require isolation from stimulation or perfect calm conditions. Regulation adapts within ordinary variability, using everyday fluctuations as opportunities to refine timing and proportional response, building resilience through routine exposure rather than through avoidance. And within this steady calibration, the system remains prepared for change without remaining elevated, capable of mobilizing energy when needed and releasing it when demand passes, guided by layered sensing and gradual adjustment that sustain balance through motion, not by stopping activity, but by allowing it to rise and fall in quiet continuity as conditions shift and settle again. Balance becomes less about returning to a fixed point and more about moving smoothly within a comfortable range. Internal systems adjust around shifting conditions rather than attempting to restore an exact previous state. Temperature, circulation, and neural activity all drift slightly as circumstances change, yet remain coordinated through shared timing signals that prevent divergence. Fluid movement throughout the body supports this coordination. Blood, lymph, and interstitial fluids carry chemical signals and nutrients between tissues, linking distant regions into one responsive network. Gentle muscular motion and vessel pulsation keep this transport active even during stillness, allowing communication to remain continuous without creating effort. Neural plasticity contributes to long-term stability by refining pathways that regulate transitions. Connections that support gradual downshifting strengthen with repetition, making recovery phases more efficient over time. This learning process occurs without conscious involvement, guided by patterns of use and biochemical signaling that favor balanced operation. Sensory expectations also adapt. Predictable environments reduce anticipatory neural firing, lowering baseline alertness while preserving detection of genuine change. This calibration allows attention to remain open without remaining tense, conserving cognitive resources and reducing unnecessary internal activation. Hormonal rhythms maintain gentle oscillation rather than prolonged elevation. Baseline levels stabilize through feedback from receptors and metabolic clearance, preventing accumulation and supporting consistent signaling across tissues. This stability allows other systems to adjust without interference from lingering chemical influence. Cellular maintenance increases during extended calm periods. Damaged proteins are recycled, membranes are repaired, and energy production becomes more efficient. These microscopic processes support overall resilience by keeping internal structures functional and responsive to future demand. Postural systems also benefit from ongoing adjustment. Microcorrections distribute load across muscles and joints, preventing localized fatigue and preserving alignment with minimal effort. This continuous redistribution supports physical comfort and reduces mechanical strain that could otherwise feed back into regulatory systems. Over time, coordination between emotional processing and physiological regulation improves. Neural circuits involved in appraisal align more closely with autonomic responses, reducing mismatch between perception and bodily state. This alignment supports smoother emotional transitions and reduces extended arousal after brief challenges. Through all of this, regulation remains decentralized. No single mechanism governs recovery or activation. Instead, countless small processes interact through timing and feedback, creating stability through cooperation rather than control. And so balance continues as an active process, maintained through motion, exchange, and constant low-level adjustment, not through stillness, but through continuous gentle response to changing internal and external conditions, carrying regulation forward into each new moment with the same quiet adaptability that has shaped every moment before. Small variations in environment are absorbed without disruption. Changes in temperature, sound, or light shift internal pacing only slightly, and those shifts are met with proportional adjustment rather than amplified response. This keeps internal conditions within a stable corridor where movement remains easy and regulation remains efficient. Circulatory feedback remains finely tuned. Pressure sensors adjust vessel tone and heart output moment by moment, preventing swings that would otherwise demand corrective effort. This precision allows blood flow to remain steady across posture changes and subtle activity without requiring conscious awareness. Neural signaling continues favoring pathways that integrate rather than isolate information. Connections between regulatory centers and emotional processing areas remain active, supporting smooth interpretation of sensory input and appropriate physiological response. This coordination reduces unnecessary alerting and supports continuity of internal state. Energy production within cells adapts to match ongoing demand. Mitochondrial activity adjusts through enzyme regulation and substrate availability, preventing excess reactive byproducts while maintaining sufficient output. This metabolic balance supports endurance of calm states without fatigue or depletion. Sensory processing remains selective. Background stimuli fade into low-priority channels, while meaningful changes still trigger appropriate orientation responses. This filtering preserves awareness without maintaining heightened vigilance, reducing cognitive load and supporting internal coherence. Hormonal signaling continues to operate within moderate ranges. Peaks are followed by timely clearance, and receptor sensitivity adjusts to maintain stable responsiveness. This prevents prolonged influence of activation signals and allows recovery chemistry to guide maintenance and repair processes efficiently. Muscle groups continue alternating between subtle engagement and release, distributing mechanical load and supporting circulation through gentle movement, even during stillness. This ongoing microactivity maintains tissue health and prevents buildup of strain that could re-trigger alerting pathways. The integration of these processes supports emotional steadiness as well. When bodily signals remain balanced, neural interpretation tends to remain neutral and proportional, reducing internal escalation and supporting stable mood patterns across changing situations over extended periods. These layered adjustments cultivate resilience, the ability to move between states smoothly without lingering in extremes. Physiological systems learn through repetition that transitions are safe and manageable, reinforcing patterns that favor timely return to balance after stimulation. And within this continuous calibration, stability remains flexible rather than rigid, always capable of adapting to new conditions while preserving internal coherence. Regulation persists as a living process, unfolding quietly through countless small exchanges that guide energy, chemistry, and neural timing towards steady equilibrium as each moment shifts gently into the next. The relationship between mind and body remains closely linked through shared signaling pathways. Thoughts influence breathing and muscle tone through subtle neural circuits, while bodily rhythms shape mental pacing through feedback from the heart and lungs. This two-way exchange keeps experience and physiology aligned rather than separated, allowing internal state to adjust as a whole rather than in disconnected parts. Chemical messengers released during calmer phases also support learning and plasticity. Synaptic connections strengthen that reflect recent patterns of successful regulation, reinforcing pathways that favor smooth recovery and stable attention. This gradual reshaping of networks improves future responses without requiring deliberate effort, shaping adaptability through repetition rather than instruction. Sleep-related processes continue preparing quietly, even while wakefulness remains present. Temperature regulation shifts, hormone ratios drift, and neural excitability changes in ways that later support deeper restoration. These preparations overlap with ongoing awareness, showing that recovery is not a single event, but a sequence that unfolds over long spans. Immune signaling remains sensitive to overall physiological tone. Balanced autonomic activity supports effective defense while preventing unnecessary inflammatory response. This moderation protects tissues and preserves energy for repair and maintenance rather than constant vigilance. Digestive rhythms synchronize with circadian timing and autonomic balance. Absorption and microbial activity follow steady cycles that support metabolic stability and nutrient availability. Chemical signals from the gut influence brain function through neural and hormonal pathways, contributing to emotional steadiness and cognitive clarity through quiet biochemical dialogue. Even perception of physical space shifts subtly as internal pacing slows. Sensory integration favors continuity over segmentation, allowing awareness to remain present without tracking every small change. This reduces cognitive strain and supports sustained calm engagement with surroundings over months and years. These consistent regulatory patterns shape long-term health and functional capacity. Cardiovascular efficiency improves, metabolic regulation stabilizes, neural resilience increases, and recovery becomes more reliable after periods of exertion, all emerging from cumulative small adjustments rather than dramatic shifts. None of this depends on eliminating stimulation or maintaining perfect conditions. Regulation adapts within everyday variation, using ordinary experience as training for flexibility and balance, strengthening systems through use rather than through avoidance. And within this ongoing adaptation, the body remains capable of shifting upward when needed and returning downward when demand fades, guided by integrated sensing and layered response that maintains stability through movement, not by stopping activity, but by allowing activity to flow into recovery and back again as part of one continuous rhythm that carries forward without pause. Internal monitoring remains active even when outward activity slows. Receptors throughout organs and tissues continue sending steady streams of information about pressure, chemistry, and temperature. These signals are compared and balanced in central networks that rarely need to produce strong output because small corrections are usually enough. Stability is maintained through constant fine-tuning rather than through occasional large shifts. Circulation through smaller vessels becomes more efficient as vessel walls respond to gentle pressure changes, opening pathways where oxygen is needed and narrowing them where demand is lower. This local control allows global circulation to remain calm while still meeting precise tissue needs, reducing overall strain on the system. Neural circuits that coordinate movement and stillness remain subtly active, preventing stiffness and maintaining readiness without visible motion. This background activity supports posture and joint alignment while conserving energy, allowing the body to remain prepared without staying tense. Chemical balance within cells continues adjusting enzyme activity and ion flow, supporting steady energy production and protecting against excessive excitation. This intracellular regulation ensures that even when external demand drops, essential processes continue smoothly without interruption. Attention shifts gradually toward internal cues rather than external scanning, not as withdrawal, but as redistribution of processing priority. Internal signals gain slightly more influence while sensory vigilance remains available in the background. This balance supports awareness without constant alertness. Emotional processing follows these same principles. Neural circuits weigh incoming information against current physiological state, preventing brief changes from producing prolonged reactions. This proportional response supports emotional steadiness and preserves flexibility for future demands over long sequences of ordinary days. These quiet adjustments accumulate into stable patterns of regulation. Systems learn to anticipate typical cycles and prepare gently in advance, reducing the need for strong corrective responses when transitions arrive. This anticipation supports smooth movement between states rather than abrupt shifts. Nothing in this regulation seeks complete rest or complete activation. Both remain available as needed, but neither dominates for long when balance is working efficiently. Activity gives way to recovery. Recovery gives way to readiness, each phase supporting the next without interruption. And within this ongoing flow, equilibrium remains something that moves with experience rather than standing apart from it, maintained through countless small exchanges of energy, chemistry, and timing that guide the system gently from one condition to the next, preserving stability through continuous adaptation that never pauses and never demands attention, continuing quietly as each moment opens into the one that follows. As this steady pattern of regulation continues unfolding across every layer of physiology, coordination becomes increasingly seamless. Signals rise and fall with less delay. Responses arrive with smaller amplitude, and recovery begins earlier in each cycle. This efficiency reflects systems that no longer wait for imbalance to grow before adjusting, but respond to the earliest shifts in temperature, chemistry, and mechanical load, keeping internal conditions close to equilibrium through anticipation rather than correction. Communication between organs remains constant through electrical impulses, hormonal diffusion, and mechanical rhythms carried by blood flow and breathing. These overlapping channels ensure that no region operates in isolation. Changes in one area are reflected elsewhere within moments, allowing unified adjustment instead of competing responses. This integration supports coherence across the entire organism. Neural networks involved in monitoring safety and stability remain active but restrained. Scanning continues, yet output remains low unless sustained change appears. This prevents brief fluctuations from triggering extended activation, preserving energy and supporting mental clarity even when conditions vary. Chemical recycling within cells becomes more efficient during calmer phases. Mitochondria regulate output precisely, reducing excess byproducts while maintaining steady supply. This balance protects cellular structures and supports consistent performance without requiring increased metabolic drive. Fluid balance within tissues also adjusts subtly. Osmotic pressure shifts guide movement of water across membranes, maintaining optimal volume and supporting nutrient exchange. This quiet regulation preserves tissue function and prevents accumulation that could disrupt signaling. Postural reflexes continue making tiny corrections, redistributing load across muscles and joints, supporting circulation and preventing stiffness. This constant micro-movement maintains readiness without visible effort, allowing stillness to remain active in support of overall balance over repeated cycles. Timing between systems becomes more closely aligned. Breathing influences heart rhythm. Heart rhythm influences brainstem activity. Brainstem activity shapes hormonal release, and hormonal patterns guide metabolic pacing. This circular coordination maintains stability through shared rhythm rather than through isolated control points. The result is not absence of activation, but proportional activation that resolves quickly once demand fades. Energy mobilizes when needed, then redistributes smoothly toward maintenance and restoration without lingering chemical or neural echo. And within this continuous calibration, balance remains a living process, unfolding through constant low-level motion, always responsive, always adjusting, never fixed, carrying regulation forward as an ongoing quiet dialogue between tissues, organs, and neural networks that sustain stability while allowing experience to change from moment to moment without disruption. The body remains capable of adapting to new patterns of activity and rest without losing stability. When demand increases for longer periods, regulatory mechanisms adjust baseline thresholds rather than simply reacting to each moment, allowing sustained performance without continuous high alert. And when demand decreases, the same mechanisms gradually recalibrate downward, restoring internal conditions toward maintenance mode without abrupt shift. Learning at the level of neural circuits supports this flexibility. Synaptic strength adjusts based on repeated timing of activation and recovery, reinforcing pathways that return systems to balance efficiently. This experience-dependent tuning improves future regulation by shortening recovery time and reducing unnecessary intensity during activation. Metabolic pathways adapt as well. Enzyme expression shifts to favor fuel sources most often required, improving efficiency and reducing chemical strain. This metabolic learning supports endurance of calm states and reduces need for rapid mobilization when demand remains moderate. Vascular networks remodel slowly in response to repeated flow patterns, improving distribution and reducing resistance. This structural adaptation supports smoother circulation and contributes to stable pressure regulation across a wide range of activity levels. Neural networks involved in anticipation also refine their predictions. reducing surprise response when familiar patterns recur. This predictive adjustment lowers baseline arousal and supports emotional steadiness in predictable environments while preserving sensitivity to genuinely novel conditions. Immune regulation continues responding to overall physiological tone. Balanced autonomic activity supports immune readiness without persistent activation, allowing defense mechanisms to remain effective while minimizing unnecessary inflammatory signaling that could disrupt recovery processes. Connective tissue responds to habitual movement patterns by strengthening along lines of use and maintaining elasticity where flexibility is required. This slow remodeling supports mechanical efficiency and reduces micro-injury that could otherwise trigger prolonged physiological activation. Through all of these layered adjustments, regulation becomes more economical over time, achieving the same stability with fewer resources and less chemical fluctuation. This efficiency supports long-term resilience by preserving capacity for change while maintaining comfort in steady states. None of this eliminates challenge or variation. Instead, it improves the ability to meet them without extended disruption. Activation still occurs when conditions call for it, but resolution follows more readily, preventing accumulation of strain across repeated cycles. And within this ongoing refinement, balance remains a process that evolves with experience, shaped by repeated exposure to ordinary fluctuations, sustained by distributed sensing and coordinated response that keep internal conditions within flexible boundaries while allowing adaptation to continue quietly in the background as each new situation arises and passes again. As these adaptive patterns continue strengthening over time, regulation becomes increasingly subtle and precise. Small changes in breathing or posture can influence broader physiological tone through connected pathways, allowing tiny adjustments to guide larger systems without needing strong signals. This sensitivity supports smooth transitions and preserves energy while maintaining readiness for changing conditions. Neural coordination across hemispheres improves during balanced states. Communication becomes more synchronized and less fragmented, supporting stable perception and steady emotional tone. This coherence reduces internal noise and allows processing resources to be shared efficiently across networks rather than concentrated in narrow circuits. Chemical signaling follows similar refinement. Baseline neurotransmitter levels stabilize within narrow ranges, reducing the likelihood of sudden swings in mood or alertness. Receptor systems adjust sensitivity so that ordinary fluctuations produce proportionate effects rather than amplified reactions. Respiratory muscles adopt efficient movement patterns, minimizing effort while maintaining effective gas exchange. This efficiency lowers overall metabolic demand and further supports autonomic balance through consistent vagal input, reinforcing calm regulation across multiple systems simultaneously. Blood chemistry remains closely regulated through kidney filtration and buffering systems that maintain pH and electrolyte balance, preventing chemical drift that could otherwise trigger compensatory stress responses. This quiet maintenance supports cellular stability and reliable signaling throughout tissues. Cognitive processing becomes less fragmented as internal pacing steadies. Thought patterns flow more continuously without frequent interruption by alerting signals, allowing attention to remain present without persistent monitoring. This continuity reduces mental effort and supports sustained calm engagement with surroundings over extended periods. These improvements accumulate into a stable regulatory profile that supports both endurance and recovery. Physical exertion resolves more efficiently, emotional fluctuations settle more quickly, and baseline physiological tone remains within comfortable limits, even as conditions vary. Learning continues at multiple levels: cellular, neural, and systemic, reinforcing pathways that favor proportional response and timely restoration. This learning reflects adaptation to normal rhythms of activity rather than to extraordinary events, shaping stability through repetition of everyday cycles. Through this ongoing calibration, the organism remains flexible rather than fixed, capable of meeting change without losing coherence, guided by integrated sensing and layered response that allow balance to persist even as demands shift across time. And as this quiet refinement carries forward, regulation remains an open process, always adjusting, always responsive, sustained through countless small exchanges of timing and chemistry that keep internal systems aligned with one another, while allowing experience to continue unfolding gently from one moment into the next without disruption. As this quiet refinement continues shaping internal rhythms, the margin between effort and ease grows wider, allowing activity to occur without immediately tipping into strain. Muscles coordinate more smoothly, breathing adapts without interruption, and circulation remains stable even as posture and movement change. This reserve of stability supports endurance while keeping recovery readily available. Neural timing remains closely linked with bodily rhythms. Heart signals influence brainstem pacing, breathing guides cortical synchronization, and sensory input is weighed against internal state before shaping response. This layered evaluation reduces overreaction and supports context-appropriate adjustment rather than fixed patterns of response. Chemical signaling across tissues remains balanced through continuous clearance and renewal. Metabolites are processed steadily, neurotransmitters are recycled efficiently, and hormonal pulses remain brief and proportional. This prevents lingering biochemical effects that could otherwise extend activation beyond its useful window. Fluid regulation also contributes to comfort and stability. Electrolyte balance supports nerve conduction and muscle function, while steady hydration maintains blood volume and tissue exchange. These conditions support reliable signaling and reduce physiological noise that could interfere with regulation. Attention remains capable of shifting outward when needed and inward when conditions allow. Neither state dominates for long when balance is maintained. This flexibility supports both engagement with surroundings and internal processing, without forcing abrupt transitions between the two. Emotional responses remain linked with physiological tone. When the body is settled, neural appraisal tends to remain neutral and proportional, preventing brief challenges from escalating into prolonged internal activation. This alignment between body and mind supports continuity of experience across changing situations. Over time, these patterns establish a stable baseline that does not require constant correction. Systems remain near their preferred ranges, making regulation less about fixing imbalance and more about maintaining gentle alignment. This reduces overall effort and supports sustained well-being across daily variation. None of these adjustments remove sensitivity or awareness. Instead, they allow responsiveness without persistent tension, readiness without rigidity, and recovery without withdrawal, preserving the ability to meet change while maintaining internal steadiness. And within this continuing flow of adjustment, balance remains present as motion rather than stillness, shaped by countless small responses that keep timing, chemistry, and energy in quiet coordination, allowing regulation to unfold naturally as each new condition arises and fades, carried forward through gentle continuity that sustains stability without needing to be noticed. The nervous system continues adjusting thresholds that determine how much stimulation is needed to trigger response. Repeated exposure to ordinary variations teaches these circuits that most changes do not require full activation, allowing future reactions to remain measured and brief. This calibration reduces unnecessary mobilization while preserving sensitivity to meaningful shifts. Neural pathways connecting sensory input with regulatory centers become more efficient. Signals travel with less delay and less amplification, supporting timely adjustment without escalating intensity. This efficiency shortens recovery phases and limits overlap between activation and restoration, keeping internal conditions closer to equilibrium across repeated cycles. Circulatory control remains finely balanced through constant feedback from vessel walls and pressure receptors. Small deviations are corrected immediately by slight changes in heart output and vessel tone, preventing accumulation of strain and maintaining smooth flow, even as posture and movement vary throughout the day. Metabolic regulation adapts to predictable patterns of energy use. Storage and release systems anticipate typical demand and prepare resources in advance, reducing the need for emergency mobilization and supporting stable blood chemistry that favors calm physiological tone. Cellular repair processes continue operating quietly during periods of lower demand. Proteins are folded correctly, damaged components are recycled, and membranes maintain flexibility that supports reliable signaling. This maintenance prevents internal disruption that could otherwise provoke renewed activation. Attention networks remain capable of narrowing when focus is needed and widening when conditions allow. This dynamic range supports efficient task engagement while preserving background awareness without persistent vigilance. Cognitive effort remains proportional rather than excessive. Emotional processing stays integrated with bodily state. Signals from heart and lungs inform neural appraisal, moderating interpretation of external events and reducing tendency toward prolonged internal escalation. This feedback supports emotional stability that reflects present conditions rather than residual activation across repeated experiences. These layered adjustments strengthen patterns of regulation that favor quick return to balance after stimulation. Recovery becomes part of the response itself rather than a separate phase that follows later, shortening the distance between effort and ease. Nothing in this system seeks complete quiet or constant motion. Both remain available as conditions shift. The defining feature is not the absence of change, but the smoothness with which change is absorbed and released through continuous feedback and timing. And through this ongoing refinement, regulation continues as a gentle conversation between tissues and networks, guided by shared rhythms of breathing, circulation, chemistry, and neural coordination, maintaining stability not by resisting variation, but by moving with it, allowing balance to persist as each moment transitions softly into the next without interruption or final state. Recovery no longer waits for complete stillness to begin. It unfolds alongside activity through overlapping pathways that soften physiological load, even while engagement remains present. Muscles release small amounts of tension between movements. Breathing adjusts its depth within each cycle, and circulation redistributes blood continuously rather than in large shifts. This layering keeps effort from accumulating into strain. Neural regulation follows the same principle. Inhibitory circuits modulate excitation before it becomes excessive, damping peaks and extending troughs so that signaling remains within functional ranges. This early modulation prevents the need for stronger corrective responses later and supports continuity of stable processing across changing demands. Chemical mediators involved in alertness and recovery coexist in balanced proportions. Slight elevations in activating messengers are countered by parallel increases in calming influences, keeping overall tone moderate rather than polarized. This chemical symmetry supports steady cognition and consistent emotional state without flattening responsiveness. Motor coordination benefits from this balance as well. Opposing muscle groups share load more evenly. Joint stabilizers engage just enough to preserve alignment without continuous contraction, and proprioceptive feedback guides movement efficiency with minimal conscious involvement, reducing mechanical stress that could otherwise feed back into regulatory circuits. Vascular dynamics remain responsive to metabolic signals. Small changes in carbon dioxide guide local blood flow precisely where activity occurs, while surrounding regions maintain baseline supply for maintenance and repair. This targeted distribution conserves energy while supporting performance without global activation. Cognitive flexibility increases as internal stability improves. Attention can shift without dragging residual arousal from previous focus, allowing smoother transitions between tasks and between outward engagement and inward processing. This fluidity reduces mental fatigue and supports sustained clarity over long periods. Emotional tone reflects this same adaptability. When physiological arousal resolves quickly, neural appraisal recalibrates sooner, preventing brief challenges from shaping longer mood states. This proportional emotional response supports continuity of experience and preserves energy for future engagement over time. These coordinated adjustments reduce the amplitude of physiological swings, not by suppressing response, but by improving timing and distribution. Energy mobilizes where needed and withdraws efficiently when demand fades, keeping the system responsive yet economical. None of this depends on eliminating variation. It depends on integrating variation into ongoing regulation, allowing every small shift to be absorbed and balanced through the same networks that guide larger changes, maintaining stability through constant fine-tuning rather than through occasional resets. And within this continuous adjustment, balance remains active and alive, sustained by countless micro-responses that guide chemistry, circulation, neural timing, and muscle tone toward coordinated equilibrium, carrying regulation forward as a quiet process that flows through each changing condition, preserving steadiness while allowing experience to continue unfolding gently from moment to moment without interruption or endpoint. As this smooth coordination continues unfolding beneath conscious notice, the nervous system maintains a quiet readiness that does not rely on constant alertness. Sensory pathways remain open while regulatory circuits keep response thresholds moderate, allowing information to pass through without immediately triggering mobilization. This balance preserves awareness while protecting internal stability. Chemical rhythms continue aligning with these neural patterns. Neurotransmitter release becomes more evenly distributed across networks, supporting steady signaling instead of sharp bursts. Receptors adjust sensitivity to match typical levels of activity, reducing the likelihood of exaggerated reactions to ordinary input. Respiratory chemistry contributes to this balance as well. Gentle fluctuations in carbon dioxide guide breathing depth and pace automatically, optimizing oxygen delivery while keeping respiratory effort low. This regulation feeds back into brainstem centers that coordinate heart rhythm and vascular tone, reinforcing calm pacing across systems. Microcirculation within tissues remains active even during stillness. Capillaries open and close in response to local demand, supporting nutrient delivery and waste removal without altering global blood pressure. This fine control keeps cells operating within narrow chemical ranges that favor efficient function and reduce internal stress signals. Neural networks involved in self-monitoring gradually reduce background activity as stability persists, freeing resources for memory integration and creative association. This shift supports mental continuity and reduces the tendency toward repetitive internal checking when bodily signals remain calm. Endocrine timing remains synchronized with these neural and circulatory rhythms. Growth and repair hormones continue supporting tissue maintenance, while activating hormones remain low and responsive rather than elevated. This hormonal landscape supports restoration without suppressing the ability to mobilize if conditions change. Postural stability continues through reflexive control that adjusts muscle tone automatically, allowing the body to remain balanced with minimal effort, reducing mechanical strain that could otherwise activate stress pathways through proprioceptive feedback over repeated cycles. These coordinated responses reinforce each other. Stable physiology supports stable perception. Stable perception supports stable physiology, forming a feedback loop that maintains equilibrium through cooperation rather than control. Nothing in this pattern requires isolation from stimulation or rigid routines. Regulation adapts within natural variation, learning from everyday fluctuations and refining responses through experience rather than through forced stillness. And so this quiet alignment of systems continues, sensing, adjusting, and rebalancing through countless small signals that guide internal state towards steady coordination, allowing balance to persist as an active process that flows gently through changing conditions, carrying regulation forward without pause, without demand, and without final boundary as each moment gives way to the next in calm continuity. The relationship between external change and internal response becomes more fluid. Variations in light, temperature, and sound register as information rather than urgency. Regulatory centers evaluate these signals against current physiological state and adjust only what is needed, keeping overall tone stable while allowing precise local response. Neural timing circuits continue refining their coordination with bodily rhythms. Heartbeat and breathing influence oscillations in sensory and cognitive networks, shaping how information is processed and stored. This alignment improves efficiency of attention and memory without increasing overall arousal, allowing mental activity to remain clear while physiological load stays low. Chemical balance in the bloodstream remains tightly regulated through liver metabolism and kidney filtration. Excess signaling molecules are cleared steadily, maintaining narrow concentration ranges that prevent lingering activation. This constant housekeeping supports smooth transitions between functional states and protects tissues from unnecessary exposure to stress-related compounds. Vascular responses continue adapting to posture and movement through immediate reflex loops. Standing, sitting, or gentle shifting of position is met with precise redistribution of blood flow that prevents pressure drops or spikes. These adjustments occur automatically and silently, preserving stability without requiring conscious control. Connective tissues and joints benefit from continuous micro-adjustment. Subtle shifts in alignment distribute forces across broader areas, preventing localized fatigue and maintaining comfort during stillness as well as movement. This mechanical balance reduces feedback into nervous system circuits that monitor strain and tension. Neural networks involved in emotional interpretation continue calibrating response based on bodily state. When physiological signals remain calm, cognitive appraisal tends to remain measured and flexible, reducing the chance that brief external events shape longer internal tone. This integration supports emotional steadiness grounded in physical regulation rather than in constant mental effort. Metabolic pacing remains synchronized with hormonal timing. Energy production rises gently with activity and falls smoothly during quieter periods, preventing sharp swings in fuel availability that could disrupt neural or muscular function. This consistency supports sustained stability across long spans of ordinary daily variation. Immune signaling remains responsive yet restrained. Surveillance continues while repair and maintenance processes dominate during extended calm phases. This balance preserves defense capacity without diverting excessive resources toward inflammation. supporting long-term tissue integrity and overall resilience. Through all of these overlapping processes, regulation becomes increasingly anticipatory. Systems prepare for typical transitions before they fully arrive, reducing the need for corrective response and keeping internal conditions within comfortable ranges even as external conditions shift. And within this ongoing refinement, balance persists not as a static point, but as continuous movement around a stable center, guided by shared rhythms of circulation, chemistry, and neural timing that coordinate countless small responses into one steady state of regulation, carrying forward quietly as each new moment unfolds and passes, without interruption and without final conclusion. And as this long sequence of quiet regulation continues without interruption, what remains most constant is not any single state of calm or activity, but the steady ability to shift between them without resistance. Energy rises when conditions require movement and focus, then redistributes gently toward maintenance and renewal when intensity fades, each phase supporting the next through shared timing rather than opposition. Internal systems remain linked through continuous exchange, circulation guiding chemistry, chemistry guiding neural pacing guiding muscle tone and breathing, no layer operating alone, each responding to small changes in the others through feedback that remains soft and proportional. This coordination allows stability to persist even as conditions vary across minutes and hours. Nothing in this balance depends on stillness or silence. Regulation adapts within ordinary motion and everyday input, learning from repeated cycles of demand and release, refining timing rather than eliminating fluctuation, so that transitions become smoother and recovery becomes part of the response itself. Over time, this steady adaptability supports resilience without effort. Tissues maintain function, signals remain clear, and awareness remains present without strain. The body continues sensing and adjusting through countless small responses that never draw attention yet never stop. And within this continuous motion, balance remains active and alive, shaped by breathing that rises and settles, by circulation that shifts and returns, by chemistry that clears and renews, by neural rhythms that synchronize and soften, all moving together in quiet coordination that does not seek an ending. So regulation carries forward as a gentle process rather than a destination, unfolding through ongoing adjustment that remains open to whatever comes next, neither holding on to tension nor holding on to rest, only continuing the same calm exchange of energy and timing that allows stability to remain present, flowing softly from one moment into the next, without pause, without signal, and without final boundary.